Hi, everybody. Good evening. Welcome to the final Urban Fellows Program webinar. Today's session is an open session with IHS faculty Gautam Bhan. If you have any questions about the UFP, about the structure, curriculum, what to do after UFP, who can apply, etc., this is your chance to ask him your questions. A couple of other announcements. You might be aware that we have extended the deadline. The new deadline is 18th April. So please make sure that you submit well before time to avoid any last minute technical glitches. If you missed any of our previous webinars, they're all up on our website and I will link them up in a bit. So please do watch them. We also have an email ID and a couple of numbers available on our website that you can write to if you have any problems with your application form. We have a whole team which is manning it and somebody will get back to you on that. So over to you, Gautam. And we are taking question and answers. Please add your questions to the Q&A box and not the chat box. We are looking only at the Q&A box. Yeah, over to you, Gautam.
Hi, folks. Good to see everybody, and thanks for joining in the midst of all that's going on. So I'm Gautam Bhan. I'm faculty as part of the Urban Fellows program at IHS. I'll give you just a quick little background on me. I'm trained as an urban sociologist, more or less, you can say it like that. And then I have a PhD in planning. And in my work, my core focus areas are on housing, urban inequality, planning and urban theory, particularly Southern urban theory, as well as social protection and welfare regimes. I teach on a lot of these things in the program, and that's what my research and my practice is also on in general. So let me just say a couple of things before we get into specific. So today's session is really led by your questions, and we're a nice small group, which is lovely, which means you can ask things that you want, and you know, and in any way that you in anything that's in your mind, really. I think that's the simplest way for me to put it. I also want to say just a couple of things before we start, however, because there's a general trend to the kind of things you should be thinking about now, as we're 4 or 5 days from the deadline for application. One is, let me reiterate that it is a complicated time to be applying to a program. So I can totally imagine actually how uncertain many of you must be feeling in trying to imagine August or September or next year, at a time when the second wave has hit so badly, at a time where, you know, it feels that just getting through the day actually seems like a heroic kind of effort. And so I just want you to also take a second to just give yourself a moment to have that freak out, so that you can have it and put it aside and continue to apply, right? All the decisions on what to do, whether to come, are all later, you know. And the good thing about decisions that are to come later is that there's no reason to let them contaminate your entire present now. So focus on the application, think only on that. Don't think about whether it makes sense to go, not go, what will happen, where's COVID, etc. We'll come to that later. Right now, the thing is, none of that will even be a factor if you don't give the best application that represents you. So just try and focus on the small step that you're doing now. Okay. The second thing is, I just really want to reinforce what Tanvi is saying. It makes a lot of sense not to apply on Sunday in the last hour. I think it just really just for you, even if you do it on Saturday or Friday. I'm not saying do it today, but just think about the last weekend instead of the last hour. I guarantee you there is a general improvement, let alone this inevitable technical rush and risk of something happening technically on your end. You know, so you just want a little bit of room so that if it doesn't happen on Sunday, you already did it on Saturday. That makes a lot of sense. And let me say a little bit again on what makes a good application, right? And I just want to say two things. A good application will not try and impress us. It's not going to be interested in trying to guess what we think. It's not going to be very performative. It's not going to sort of tell us the 100 things that you have done to excel and become this sort of creature of excellence. We're not interested in that. A good application will really show us that you are a person who has thought about why you want to go back to a classroom at this point in your life and want to go back to this classroom in particular, an interdisciplinary urban program, a fellowship program that's not a degree, that will open you up and diversify your interests, not focus you down into something specific. We want to see your fit with the program. We want to see that you've looked at it and said, this is what I want. I want this interdisciplinarity. I want to be with this set of people. I want to be in this kind of program. We want to see your curiosity about the urban. We want to see your questions. Many times in applications, people make many kinds of claims. But the application that I actually love best are the ones that say, these are the questions to which I have no answers. Okay? I don't understand why this is happening. I don't understand why this is happening. Why is this like this? Why is this like this? Why can't this happen like that? Because if you have those questions, it shows us that you're struggling in thinking about how to be an urban practitioner already. That's what makes the fellowship a good fit for you, is that you're looking for answers to questions that are already in your mind, right? Ask questions in your essays. Show us that you've looked at the program. Talk to us about the fit with the program, okay? All of you will bring unique learning to this program. The thing is it the right program for you at the right time, right? So tell us that you've looked at it and considered it. Don't write in someone else's voice. Don't write using big words you would not normally use. Don't write to demonstrate. Be honest, write like you talk, sound like yourself. Don't worry about grammar. Don't worry about language. Don't worry about aggressive. Write passionately, write with curiosity, and write your questions. Tell us what the urban means to you. Tell us what just sticks with you about it. Tell us what you're looking for. We're not afraid about confusion or lack of clarity. That we want that confusion to have turned into a moment where you're looking for answers. You know, sometimes you're confused and you want to just be left alone to be confused. That's not a good time to come to a fellowship. Sometimes you're confused and you're done with being confused and you have a bunch of questions and you want some answers somewhere and you're ready to start looking for them. That's a good time to come to the fellowship. Okay. And so really in the application, think about honesty, write an application that has curiosity and passion in questions, not one that is CV-led or performance-led. I don't care where you went to college. I don't care what kind of grades you got. I don't care about your mark sheet. I don't care about any of these things. Okay, so that's not the kind of excellence we're looking for. Show us one way of how you think and feel, and then it will communicate to us among the many applications that we read. Okay, yeah, that's kind of the thing I had to say actually, and to remind you that you shouldn't worry right now about financial support or your ability to pay fees, because this is a need blind program, which means if you get in, we will give you the support that you need. Okay, so don't worry about those things now. Don't worry about the circumstances now. Don't worry about the pandemic now. Right now, just write the best application that represents you the most. Okay. So let me open with those words, and now let's take questions about any part of the program that you want to do. So you can throw some things in the Q&A box. We're going to pick up some questions that have been online in the world of Instagram, in where I don't live, but I'm told many people do, and things happen. And so from that mystical world, we'll open with some of those questions maybe, and I will read them out. Yeah,
Gautam, I'm happy to read those out and you can maybe address them. The first question is, what are the benefits of the program? How can it help your career? It's usually a standard question that we get.
Sure. And, and Shubham has a question in the chat saying, what after UFP? So good. So let me combine those two together, right, and talk about it. All right. So there's two ways to think about what after UFP. Okay. So one is that so remember that you're coming into UFP with something. You're not an empty vessel. So you've come in with some kind of training. Say you're an engineer, you're a journalist, you're a lawyer, you're an architect, you're a sociologist or something. You may be looking for two things. You may want to stay in that track, okay? And then you use the UFP to kind of add an urban dimension to your track, in which case you kind of stay within your field, but you differentiate yourself from your peers because you urbanize that work. Let me give you an example. We had a graduate, these are all examples of fellows of previous times. Right? So I can imagine who was an engineer, and he used to work for TCS, Tata Consulting Services. He came out, he remained an engineer, but he joined the Delhi Metro to work on the intersection between engineering and transport and urban mobility systems. Okay, so he remains in his core disciplinary training because he wanted to, but he added the urban to his way of understanding what he did. Or a journalist who came to us and then became a specific reporter on data stories about the urban for the Hindu and the Mint for many years. Okay? So some folks will remain on track and then use that to differentiate themselves in the job market from other people with similar training. A second set of folks will want to be escaping their training, right? So, it's a known fact that many of us who study, especially in our initial degrees, either study what we had good enough marks for or study what our parents told us to study. In which case you may actually say, look, I did my BA, BTech, BSc, whatever, but actually now I'm trying to figure out what I want to do. In which case you will refract. Okay? You will use the program to find a way to enter and find the practice that you want in urban sectors. Okay? So those are the two main trajectories. Those will consolidate on the previous training or refract into the urban sector on previous training. What kind of work you do really depends on you. I mean, I think so the individualized journeys are actually so different that there's no standard post-UFP trajectory. What I can tell you is the kind of things that alumni have done, and I encourage you to spend some time on the website looking at the alumni testimonials on this. One set of our folks joins professional practice firms at various scales. So they join planning firms, they join practices, they join consulting firms, they join development consultancies. Okay, so we have fellows who've gone to work with CBRE, with Ernst & Young, with WRI, with Adapt, with Dunzo, with various kinds of professional private firms, in a sense, right, that do active project and client-based work. We have a whole set of folks who will go into the research policy think tank space. It's a very common UFP trajectory. So they work at CPR, they work at WRI, they work at ITTP, they work at the Observer Research Foundation, they work at, so all kinds of different research think tanks that take that trajectory. There's a set of folks who work in development sector organizations, doing direct and more applied field work, field-based and community-based work. Folks that join SEVA, that join SEES, that join the Center for Migration, that join the Keystone Foundation, that join, folks who want to do more intimate, more involved work embedded in local and particular places with communities. And we have a whole set of folks who graduate into trajectories of higher education. Remember, a third of your class will have a bachelor's but not a master's. And many of them will use the fellowship to find which master's to do. So a whole set of folks will go into master's and PhD, both in India and internationally afterwards. And I can think of our alumni who are in the best programs, both in India and internationally. So those are the kind of broad trajectories you get: private firms, development sector and political organizations, research think tanks and policy think tanks and organizations, and as well as several who work directly with government. We had one of our alumni who's won and run Zilla Panchayat election in his home district in Karnataka, and so now is part of the political system. We have others who have sat and entered the UPSC a year after graduating, and now is part of the Indian Foreign Service. So there's lots of trajectories, but there is no single UFP trajectory because of the nature of the class. Because you come in from such diverse disciplines and life histories that each of you will fashion your outcome trajectory in the way that makes sense for you, depending on where you start. Okay? The good news is that in the 2-month internship that you have, that's one possibility for you to see the real diversity of possibilities that are open to you, right? So when we show you 70 organizations across these categories, think tanks, applied, professional firms, social movements, advocacy organizations, development sector work, media houses, art practices, all of those things, that gives you a sense of those possible trajectories. So really it's about finding a sense of practice for yourself, and then thinking about how to use UFP in your individual journey, depending on how you came in. But those are the broad trajectories that you have that are there. Our post-fellowship alumni placements actually have been really good. I'll remind you that we don't run a guaranteed placement program for jobs, but we guarantee you the 2-month internship. That for many fellows, that internship is actually a good quarter of them actually transition to full-time positions in the internship itself. And many of them use that to figure out what they want. But what I also want to say is that you will actually also really shift in a lot of your own assumptions about yourself in terms of what you want to do from the start to the end of the fellowship. So what you think you want to do now, I can pretty much guarantee you will not hold by the time you're done. And that's part of the process. Yeah.
Gautam, there's a connected question on how is the UFP useful for urban planning and MTech students?
So if you're coming from planning, you have to ask yourself why you want to come to an interdisciplinary urban fellowship, especially if you've already done a master's level degree in planning, right? So maybe a couple of things. The way we teach planning right now is very linked to the spatial. It's very physical planning oriented. So it's not something that actually allows you to think of the urban multi-sectorally. It doesn't allow you to hold the social and the economic and the governance institutions as well. Many of the planners who've come through our program always say this, that they came out, they came into the program with a sense of how the urban works and realized that they were looking at a very small and narrow part of it. So many of the things for you are really actually about that. I mean, for planning, the difficulty for you is this, and I'm very honest about it. Many of the things you read on the website and first encounter when you come will sound very familiar. So there's an instinct among the planners saying, I know this. But what you mean when you say, I know this, is I've heard these words before. It doesn't mean you've thought about them the way we teach them. So for planners, it takes a little bit longer to realize that the interdisciplinarity we are teaching is actually very different from the interdisciplinarity that they were taught. But I also want you to think about what makes you, as someone who has a master's degree in planning, still want to be in an interdisciplinary urban fellowship. It must be something you were missing in your education. It must be something you're dissatisfied with, something you're looking for. Think about what that is, because that's exactly the thing that will be part of a good reason for you to come and to be a part of your application. Yeah.
There's a question regarding the statement, about the sample of work. What do you look for in architecture portfolios?
Something beyond the rendering. Oh God, I know it's very pretty and it looks very good and they all look amazing. Give us some sense of your thought in it. So, right, throw in something that you did by hand. Show me a draft of something. Write a narrative about what you think about the architectural drawings. So, a lot of architectural portfolios, you don't get to control what you produce, right? You're responding to a studio provocation, responding to a client. But in this, you get to frame that work and say, here's what I did, here's what I thought about it, here's what I actually think about it. Here's what I would have done differently if the client wasn't there. Here's actually the skill part of this, and I'm really glad I know, but I'm actually frustrated. When I look at this, I would be fascinated to see an architectural portfolio that had annotations on the portfolio saying, here are my real thoughts about this work, looking at it a year later, right? Actually, I would be fascinated to see that for any sample of work in any discipline, and it'll like dialogue with yourself kind of deal. But, just remember that we aren't going to be impressed by the technical qualities of your renders. We're going to be interested in your process of approaching the question you got. So the stuff that you hide back for the architectural jury and the crit, bring back for us. Give us a sense of the fact that you've not done yet another plaza design, yet another township development, yet another public building. Give us a sense in the narrative of how you approached it. What was your thought process? How did you sense this place? I think that's what we want to look at. That's what we want to, that's what will set your portfolio apart a little bit, that you try to grapple with this standard architectural frame and try to do something new.
There's a question if we can write the statement of essays in our mother tongue.
Yeah, absolutely. Write it in whatever you want. There will be someone in the faculty who can read it and grade it. Write the whole application, whatever you want, and be uninhibited about it.
No more questions via Instagram, but there is something in the chat box here.
I can pick it up from here.
Yeah.
So folks that are in the webinar, really don't be shy. As you can see, in the chat, one of our current fellows is complimenting my shirt. We're at a very relaxed place. It is a very nice shirt, I have to say. I will display it later. But take Mumal's cue. It's probably a good sign that current fellows are hanging out in a webinar on Tuesday night when they should be working on their internship. So we'll let that go for now. But the rest of you, really throw in whatever questions. Don't worry. You're in the webinar. I will keep rambling if you need to, but there are no stupid questions about this, and it's good to ask them now while you're doing the work to be here, okay? Okay, guys, the current fellows can please pipe down. All right, let me start. Anonymous attendee, a related question about the sample of work. I'm a law student, so most of my work is legal research and writing. Any pointers on how I can go about this? May I submit any of my previous assignments? Yes. So submit one of your assignments, submit one of the assignments that you've done before. And I would suggest that you pick an assignment where you felt like you had the most freedom to articulate an argument in your own voice. That wasn't very narrow. So if you had an assignment that allowed you to think of a new topic, research on a new topic, because that will allow us to get a sense of the way you write and the way you argue and the kind of things that you looked at. So, pick something as open-ended. It doesn't have to be long or complex, but pick an assignment that you felt sounded the most like you. And that would be my advice in giving us a writing assignment out of law. So feel free to pick out those. Does that make sense? Yeah. So Shravani, same question that is asking about a last year law student. I imagine in law school at some point you wrote either a brief or a paper or an assignment, you explored some, think of your jurisprudence class, think of the consti law electives, think of things that you wrote that were beyond just the technical sort of compositions of law. Like, I don't want something from torts, right? But if you give me something that reflected on jurisprudence, on law and justice, on legal philosophy, or even on, an interesting case, like a commentary on a case that had implications for the urban. There are so many urban case laws that have such strong implications for urban governance. I mean, half our cities are governed by PIL decisions, in many ways. So think of something you wrote as part of one of your law school assignments and classes, and it doesn't have to be urban related. But again, like I was saying to the other question, really try and give me an assignment where you got to write a lot and speak in your own voice and make an argument. Once in a while you get those good ones. That will give us a sense of you. Okay, does that help? Let me know in the Q&A box if that answers your question. Shubham, yes, after 2 months internship, can you get placed there? You can, but it really depends on the organization, depends on when people are hiring. Every year, a percentage of fellows do that. But again, it really depends. It varies in different ways. So no guarantees, but yes, it's your first entry, right? Which is a really nice thing. But yes, so I would say on an average, over the years, somewhere between 20%, 25% of people get offers to be absorbed where you intern. So that's kind of the ratio we work with. But again, some years it's less, some years it's more. Some years all the fellows take those offers and stay, and some years fellows take other offers and don't want to stay. So both of that also happens. Okay, so Anjana is asking me how a geographer can be benefited. So again, and then there are geographers and there are geographers and there are geographers, so it depends on what kind of geographer you are. I would ask you a different question. As a geographer, what are the questions about the urban that you think about? Are you thinking in terms of human geography and you want to really understand the relationship between space and society and culture, in which case a lot of elements in the program will really fit you. If you're a physical geographer and you're really interested in, say, a geological approach or looking at ecological geography, really looking at soil and floodwaters and marshland, then there are particular electives that you can take and you'll have a different kind of specialization. But again, remember, this is an interdisciplinary course. So if you're very specific about the kind of things you want to look at as a physical geographer, not going to answer too many of the technical aspects of your question, though we have had folks who do very technical work, but the fellowship is not the best attended place, right? It's not the best place for something that gets very technical. And so just think about which kind of geographer you are, and I think that will help you. As a human geographer or a critical geographer, it's, who's interested in the urban, this is a very good fit. And, in your application, talk about how being a geographer informs your wanting to come to the UFP. Talk about spatiality, talk about space, talk about all those things that as a geographer makes you think about the urban. Okay. All right, anonymous attendee saying, if a previously selected candidate who decided not to take it up is reapplying, what would you say they should focus on this time? Would trying to put forth changes in their ideas process since the last year be a good place to start? Look, if you got in last year, then the odds are you did everything right last year. And we don't hold any grudge against you for not coming. So don't feel like you need to explain to us why you didn't do it. Well mentioned in the application that you were selected last year. And it would be nice to hear if there were not limiting circumstances that made you not want to come, but a decision not to come. Yes, then these changes in your ideas and why you feel it's a good time now would be lovely to hear, just because it will tell us more about your motivation and your fit. So put that in, but don't feel like you need to defend why you didn't come last year. It's totally fine, if that makes sense. Abhijit is saying there are sections of the application on internship, volunteer work experience, but not training experience. Would it be okay if I add the other experience given the application form? The answer is yes, it would be. Feel free to please do so. Okay. Could you please share if the COVID-19 pandemic and its impact on the applicant would be factored in while assessing their application? I'm not sure I understand how that would happen. I think if you share with us a little bit in the application, your COVID experience, and if that's informed in some way your ability to think about this or made you want to come, etc., we would certainly consider it, because we would have no other way to take that into account. But I may not be understanding your question fully. So will you explain it a little bit more? Yeah. Okay, Aditi, you're a journalist looking to apply. Good. I had a more technical question. Is it okay for me to use links in my portfolio to my written work? Because they're large articles. I'd really like to use my portfolio to give contextual info about an article and link to it rather than attach large files. It would be, but can I suggest one thing? Take one and paste the text, okay? And then say, here are links to 2-3 other pieces I've written. Because remember, when you're reading hundreds of applications, the chances of us linking to multiple articles is unlikely, and also it's not fair to the other students because they will have picked one thing from their portfolio of work and put it in. So I would say ethically also to keep it fair to other applicants, an 800,000 word piece is too long to put. Write an abstract summary of it and link to it. I would prefer if you picked one piece and told us why you picked the piece in the text you write and say it's too long, but here's a published piece as a journalist. And I think that's fine. But don't drown us in links of lots and lots of pieces, right? So try and think a little bit of, tell us why you picked the piece and what it shows about you and your interest in your work, and then abstract a little bit and then give a link to the complete piece so we can take a look at it. I think that's fine. And if you're thinking about attaching, also a sample of work. So you can even attach those things. So then you can give a couple of links because you could just put them together in one PDF. So it's okay. But my advice, don't you love? I was just like rambled and thought out loud for a second. My advice would be pick one piece and write a framing thing on why you picked that piece and what it represents about you. Better to go that way than to drown us in a large number of articles. Okay, if that makes sense. Please tell me if that answered your question because I went off into some trajectory in my head. Okay. So Anjana saying watershed management in the river in Bangalore. Yeah. So on the ecology front, watershed front, there's a whole set of people who work on ecology. We teach an ecology week in the Commons. There are folks who work on watersheds and ecological landscapes in IHS. There are projects. So this is a good fit for us. Yeah. So if this is the kind of geography you're coming at, this is a good fit for you to pick up. And I think what we will challenge you to do, and that's something you have to think about, you have to think a little bit about the fact that we will keep pushing you back from this idea of the watershed and not immediately let you go and fix it, but instead make you think about the watershed from perspectives that are not about ecology or geography at all. So for a while, it'll be like, I want to go fix the watershed, and we'll be like, hold on, understand it first. And at that point, you'll be like, these guys are really annoying. And then later on, you'll be like, actually, that was really useful. That kind of happens during the fellowship. But it'll be a good thing for you to realize that you should be coming here in order to say, so let me ask you this, when you write your application, think about what is it about what you already know that is not enough to solve the watershed problem? Why do you need to come to an interdisciplinary urban fellowship to learn more about watersheds when you already have studied them in geography? That's the gap. That's what you need to answer for yourself and also tell us in the application. Okay. Okay, good. Aditi sorted. Shubham, being an engineer from mechanical background, college projects were completely poor. So do we need to relate it to urbanization sample we work? No. Don't relate it to urbanization, relate it to you. So show us the mechanical engineering wala project. Tell us what you did in it. Tell us your thought process in it. Put a small introduction. Thoda sa bata de ki kya ho raha tha usme, right? What was going on? And that way, and say, this is what I know how to do, right? That's it. It gives us a sense of your work. That's what we want from the sample of work. We don't need it to tell us something about the urban. We need it to tell us something about you and what you currently know how to do. Not in order to like assess it, but in order to understand where you will build from if you get into the program. Okay, does that make sense? Good. I think I'm currently caught up, so I can wait while people throw in. So all such serious, well-behaved questions. It's very impressive. If I've not answered this COVID-19 pandemic impact question, could the person who asked it just explain to me a bit more what they mean? I'm not quite sure I understand it. Okay, would like to know about the interview after we submit the application. What kind of questions or discussions can a candidate expect? I'm half tempted to ask the current fellows who are hanging out this webinar for reasons known only to them to answer this question, but I'll give you my perspective on it. Here's what I think would be useful. So the interview is really a conversation. It's not a kind of interrogation about, we want to sort of get a sense of connecting the application and the person. So we want to hear you in consonance with your application. We want to give you a chance to build more on the themes of the application. We want to hear more. Sometimes, there's a lot of folks who are able to orally express a lot better but they don't quite do in writing. Some people go the other way, where they write much better than they orally express. But we want to connect the two. So actually, we want to get a sense of knowing you. We want to be able to talk to you. We want a sense of saying, okay, this is the person in the application, and here's that application makes more sense to us in context of the interview. It helps us clarify your motivations. It helps us assess that there's a good fit for you in the program, that you will gain from it as much as we will gain from you being here. It helps us hear how you think. So when we talk to you about a problem statement or ask, it helps us hear how you respond to things that are new to you. Because one key part of the fellowship is there's constantly new things being thrown at you. And the interview is a place for us to see, what do you do when new things come at you? How do you respond to them? How do you think through them? How do you think through when you don't know the answer already, right? So, and we're happy to see you fumble through it, as long as you just begin to work it out. So it gives us a sense of the way you think. I will say, I think at least the ones I do, they're very low stress. They are most people have not come out of them feeling tortured. They're really quite relaxed. They are, in some ways, some of them may even be enjoyable. That rumor has been suggested a couple of times. That's the thing to think about, if that helps. So I don't think, and the same rules apply for the application. Don't try and be impressive, just be yourself. Don't try and game the interview. Don't try and guess what we're thinking. Just be honest. And the more you're in and thinking and being yourself, the better it will be for you. So that's the only thing I would say. Don't prepare. Don't learn anything. Kuch ratke nahi aana hai, koi kunji nahi hai, there's no guide, nothing like that. Okay. Okay, being a writer and an activist, why did you join IHS? This is like some existential question of my life. So actually, I joined IHS very early when it was there. I was the 5th person who joined. We were very few of us. And so actually, I've grown with the institution in some ways. So I didn't quite join later. And I joined it because I actually, in many ways, thought it was an institution where it was possible to be a writer, teacher, and an activist. And that is, to me, what institutions of higher education should be. And I've stuck around because I have been able to be all of these things at IHS. I am a person who is very clear that one of my modes of activism is my teaching. I think of teaching as an activist practice. I think of it as a political and ethical practice, not just as some technical transactional thing about knowledge download, which is important because post-Google, teachers really need to have a reason to be teachers. Huh? Have to, I feel like we have to really justify what we're there for. So to me, there isn't a distinction between being a writer and an activist and being in a university space. To me, they're the same. So I think of teaching as a kind of activism. I joined IHS because I wanted to be in a place where I got to teach and I got to research and I got to practice. I think one of the key things for me that I have enjoyed in this institution, I feel like many of us have collectively built, is that it takes practice very seriously, but of different kinds. By which I mean, it takes activism and advocacy as seriously as a practice as consulting and plan making and budget analysis and academic writing. It realizes that all of these practices are needed to be part of the urban system, but it also realizes that there's big power hierarchies between them. And we struggle with how to balance these two things. And we never get it right because no institution gets it right. But the reason I think it's been good for me to be here is because at least in IHS, the struggle is there and you can call it, right? So you call it so that you struggle better. How do you hold the competing tensions between activists and analysis, between critique and proposition, between power and its reproduction? These are questions that inform my activism, and these are questions I can hold at IHS, and they inform my teaching, they inform my research, and that's kind of why we're there. So yeah, so in a way, I've been here as long as IHS has been here. So it's a weird way to think about it in terms of joining it, if that answers your question. Okay. Okay. Which part of the application is more important to concentrate on? I mean, there's only 3 questions in it, so it's not a lot, right? I think the question on why you want to be an urban fellow is the first thing we read from you. This is the first question. So strike the right tone in that and really kind of give us a sense that you didn't write a generic answer that could have been used in any application to any program. Just make us feel like that answer is for the UFP particularly, right? Mention the parts, talk about the commons, talk about the structure, talk about interdisciplinarity. That'll help. And then I think take seriously that middle question on the work experience or the urban moment or the essay. I think that's the place where we get to see the complexity in your thought. But basically those, in a 3 application question, they're fairly evenly distributed, but that's really all that counts. Those are the 2 I would really, but get the Urban Fellows question right, because that's the order in which we read, if it helps. Okay. Okay, so how many people who make it to the selected cohort also identify themselves in need of scholarship? How many of them generally end up convincing IHS about their financial needs? I really appreciate that IHS has minimal fees and very economical, yet why have fees at all? Or lose on this great opportunity to make it financially inclusive in one shot without them. So yeah, I mean, this is one of those tensions I was talking about. It's very, very difficult because it is unsustainable. I'll be very clear. It is unsustainable for us to have a fully fee program. It will make us endlessly dependent. We will need some kind of sustainability for the program to have value that comes from some amount of fees being paid, because otherwise it's only a question of when we can support it or not. And the other hand, if the program becomes unaffordable, it defeats one of its primary purposes. So this is a foundational tension. I have no quick and dirty answers to this. So far, we have held the fees as much as possible. And I think one of the key things we do remember is we accommodate the room and board within the fees, which actually means that the fees are much lighter than that whatever the figure is, 2+ years to whatever the figure is, right? Because it includes it internalizes all your staying and living costs in many ways. And that's a huge kind of figure. But at least for now, I think that a completely free program creates a donor dependency that is not right and not sustainable. So I think we do have to find some way for the program to sustain itself. So there has to be a fee model. These are difficult institutional choices. We grapple with this a lot. But what's important and what we are committed to is to make it a need blind program. Okay, so here's the real full answers to the question you're asking. So a need blind program means we cover all the needs that you do. We don't look at your financial ability to pay as part of your admission. And if you're admitted, we are committed to covering that. Now, I would say every year, pretty much half the class gets some kind of support. There are most people who ask for it get something at least. It's very rare that someone asks for it and gets nothing. Very rare. Because also people are very considerate, I have to say. I think the admitted classes are very considerate, and people who believe they can afford it don't ask. And every year, it's remarkable to me. I think it's a sign of real grace to kind of take that on. Because it would be very different if we looked at your financial information while admitting you, because then it would influence our admission, but we don't, and that's why we don't ask for it at all. And a good third of the class will get, and the support is extensive. So not only do you get a full waiver of the fees, for a set of fellows, we also give living support stipends, because we don't want, it's one thing not to have costs. The other is also to be able to have an equitable everyday life. You don't want to be in a position where someone is constantly worried financially about needing to send money back home, not being able to take a shared Ola because you don't have that kind of cash to spend, not being able to spend extra on materials or go to a field visit or go for a 5th time to the site. And so we intervene into those things. So the stipend is part of that. We have had a few students over the years who have said that the scholarship we've offered has not been enough for them. But I would say they have been the rarer number of cases. In most cases, when we've offered the scholarship packages, they've been accepted and people have enrolled. So it works, I would say 90% of the time. Our need estimations have been on point. And I think that's the data that we have at this point. But I would say that from the diversity of our cohorts, every year we've had a significant set of folks who not only get full support, but get living support. And we haven't had a case in the 5 years that I know of where we have really taken someone from a marginalized background who has not attended because they didn't get enough support from us. That has not happened. We've had a couple of people who've said other competing trade-offs and priorities are there, which is why they can't come unless they get more than what they've gotten. But we've never had someone who said, I can't afford anything, and has from us not gotten the amount of support they need to come. And that living stipend, I think, makes a big difference if that helps. Yeah. Okay. Alithia, who's one of our current fellows, is saying that she misses us. I miss you guys too. It's good to see you here. And one word question, graduation. Okay, listen, guys, we will discuss this somewhere else. Don't hijack other people's webinars, okay? We'll talk later. All right. Avijit is saying, so my TED talk, great, yes. Unfortunately, I couldn't find more videos of you in Hindi. Your English is very difficult to understand. Good to know you through UFP. I wish more people would give me a chance to speak not in English, but no one seems to be interested in hearing me outside English, so that's the issue. But if hopefully we'll have a chance to talk a lot more about this on some of the other ones there. I had a plan to house 100 million people. What happened to it? You said it on TED Talks. We are ladai jari hai. We are constantly trying to engage. Actually, we do a lot of practice work around upgrading and housing and all that work. So that 100 million and all that is all TED's publicity team. Okay, so that you take up with them. I never said anything in the talk about 100 million people come bold plan and all that, but that's I suppose what the internet age is like. But actually, I mean, a serious answer to your question is that a lot of ourselves, a lot of our work is not just about our teaching, because all the faculty at IHS are involved in research and practice projects simultaneously. And that's where we work towards the arguments we make. So we are also trying to apply and struggle with all the things we teach in the messiness of the real world, and bringing that messiness of the real world back into the classroom and saying, look, we're trying this and we're not sure, but this is what we're trying, right? So, and I think, for you guys in the second term of the course, when you join IHS projects, you see that work. You see the work that's ongoing, where everything is emerging and evolving, and we're trying to figure it out ourselves. And that's the plan. And the TED Talk is a mode of practice. You do it not just as a way to sort of communicate because it's nice to have a TED Talk. It is a mode of advocacy. It is a mode of trying to make an argument you believe in, have larger public political purchase to change the words people use to talk about things. So when you learn in class that semantics matter, that representation matters, that discourse matters, that language matters, then you go out and do a talk anywhere you can and make the argument that change the word and use this word and not that word, because you believe that changes a certain political belief about what's happening, right? So don't think of the TED Talk, the thing that makes work happen. That is also work, because advocacy is also practice. Communication is also practice. Language is also practice. Thought work is also practice. And that's the thing to hold on to and to think about. Okay, so Rashika is saying, I've been working in the development sector for a year now. I find myself seeking mentorship to gain a sense of clarity in the terms of future engagements. How suitable is a UFP for me? You are the UFP's ideal type candidate, as all the other current fellows will tell you. No, this is why it's a good place to come, to think of finding your way, of having worked for a year, of struggling to figure certain things out in that year of work. So when you apply, Rashika, write to us what this year of development sector work has given you and not given you. What are you struggling with? What can't you do? What are you looking for? What's the confusion? Work through the confusion and tell us a story from it. And say, I want to come to get clarity on this confusion to the UFP, right? So it's a very good place to get the kind of mentorship to think your way through, to find out where to go next. But for that, you have to be clear, and your application has to communicate to us. You've already thought a little bit about where you are after a year. Where are you stuck? What's in your mind? Give us some of that story so we can sense and say, okay, she comes in, she's been thinking about these things, this is the way she will go, right? That gives us some sense of your trajectory. Okay? Does that help answer your question? Let me know in the chat. We still have 4-5 minutes left. So anyone want to throw in something else? Current fellows, if you want, you can give a score out of 10 on how honest and truthful you think my answers have been, having just gone through the program. This is me taking a pedagogical risk. Oh, 8.9. Thanks, Boomer. Specific, it's a very specific score on how not to give 9. It's like, how far can you go? Chala, good. I have some audit credibility that I have answered truthfully and not just for PR. Rajat is just generally mean with marks. So 8.6 is other than he was not going to pick that. Folks, while we're doing all fellows, all folks in registered attendees, please feel free to add any more questions you want to ask. You can also ask questions about non-application, non-super serious things. I'm happy to answer them as well. Anything anyone wants to pull in or pick up? Tell us about the role of artists in urbanizations in general. Tell us about your favorite artists. Oh, what a good question. I think so. I'll tell you what I am good with art. Why it works for me. I'll tell you why it's been really useful. I think that in many ways, a lot of my work on thinking about inequality in politics has actually been very simply, how do you get people to give a shit about something? You know, because as human beings, we spend a lot of effort in our lives trying to shield ourselves from things that make us uncomfortable, you know, or knowledge that makes us uncomfortable. There are very important, difficult ways in which we try and control what we get. I have always thought that art for me is a way to remind me why I care about what I do. It reminds me of the importance of affect and not just data. It reminds me of the importance of motivation and feeling and commitment. I don't believe you can be politically active unless you can make someone not just convinced by the rigor of your arguments, but moved into empathy by a certain register of feeling. And I think there are certain things where you have to feel them before you can know them. And art for me is a vector of feeling. It's a vector that produces that kind of, it has the ability to move you in ways where you don't yet have the language, you don't have the data, you don't have the structure, you don't understand it, but it moves you to want to, right? It's that first sense of that. And so to me, art is critical in the urban. To survive it in the everyday, to think about it in, it's how do we survive us? Look at our cities. Look at what our cities do to most of the people who live in our cities. For most residents of our cities are humiliation, are stress, they are a violence upon their person. And yet they find a way to look at the rhythms of everyday life and hold on and hope and move and fight, right? I want to think about that space of feeling. And to me, art does that. And there are so many, I can't even think in terms of like who to refer. I'll tell you two people whose work I used recently in teaching. One is an artist called Priya Ravish Mehra. And she did this work in the Kochi Biennale a few years ago that had layered different kinds of material textures on top of each other. And for me, it was a way to think about this notion of repair, which I've been writing about a lot, and think about repair in its distinction between marammat and rafu, right? And think about patchwork, and to think about, and whenever I look at her work, it has, it's like this shaded indigo paper that's melting into a thatch, that's melting into plaster, that's melting in, and it makes me think precisely of that auto construction, incremental built environment of our cities, right? That you're on the metro in Delhi, you look out and there is a building and it has red brick outside and it won't be plastered and it won't be painted, and there's a rod, and from that concrete pillar, the saria, the concrete rods are sticking out because the housing is never finished, and it's always this process, and it's actually time. That, and I think of that and I think of her work, and to me, in my mind, what is the feeling? The feeling is time. The feeling is that gentle, incremental way of how our cities are built. The feeling is that most people in our cities live in houses while building them. They don't wait for it to be ready and come in when everything's fixed. And conceptually, that makes me think of incrementality and informality and housing, etc. But when I want to feel that sense of time, that someone who comes in and works hard for a generation has to wait 5 years for water and 7 years for electricity and 8 years for sewage, that sense of that feeling of time comes from art. So, you know, if so much of our work is about this mix of empathy and rigor, then to me, fundamentally, that empathy comes from art. It's always given to me. It has always given to me, if that answers the question. All right, last words, guys. About 4-5 minutes. Something someone wants to add in? Any questions you want to ask? Tanvi, can you help me with this? I forget the timeline of it. I think it's on the site. I think we.
Yeah, so I think the shortlisted candidates for the interview will be notified by May, middle
I
May.
think so. Yeah.
And then interviews will be set up during the first week of June. And towards the end of June, the final class will be notified.
Yeah, we'll get the first one. I think that's the timeline. Yeah, that makes sense. Day, life, weekend life of the fellow. You're in class a lot. You read a lot. Thursdays and Fridays, hopefully we get you out of the class into the field for your practica or for your projects. There are master classes, there are public events. While you're there, there will be a 3-day writing festival called City Scripts. There will be a 3-day film festival called Urban Lens. There will be a policy dialogue next year called the Urban Policy Dialogue. So there will be events. There will be a chance to explore the city in different ways. Mostly you will be in class longer than you should be, because while we keep trying not to intensely overteach, we always do. And it's an intense, hectic program. It is what you do. It is like life in many ways, but we have a lot of fun during it. I think it's nice. Everyone eats lunch communally, so you get to see everyone all the time, all these places. Yeah, if that helps. Artists who went to the UFP and what gained and shared with the cohort. Check out some of the alumni interviews. Moomal is on this chat. You can look her up. She came out of industrial design and also experimental video, I think, or experimental something. I forget now. Moomal will kill me, but I forget. Look at the work of Gauri Nagpal, who graduated from us 4 or 5 years ago as a sound and art practitioner, did guerrilla artwork, and then ended up going to an MDes M-Plan. So things also happen to artists after they come out of the UFP. They also become MDes M-Planners. But she's been designing modified street vending carts, actually, recently, I think, in many ways. So yeah, there's a bunch of folks whose art practice works in very different ways, and they end up doing work in very different ways. And I think some of the alumni tutorials will give you a sense of that. Contemporary art, sorry, yes, contemporary art. But at one point you told me you studied industrial design and experimental something. Okay, I haven't forgotten it. So just think of what you said to me then. Shubham, I have no idea whose interviews I take. I hope you get to the interview stage. It will be fun. If you get to talk, that'll be nice. Sushmita was saying, I want to ask you something. I really feel like cities are losing empathy. How does one do something about it? You know, I don't think our cities have ever been very empathetic. I actually think we've just begun to grapple with how fundamentally messed up they are as vehicles of social power, right? Okay, and that I think is a very different set of, you know, that's another discussion. So I actually think we're finally beginning to get to some kind of contestations where the structural inequality of our cities is slightly shaking, mostly because of the assertion of people who were historically marginalized, finally finding voice and some material stability to fight fights and finding people who are willing to engage with them. So I don't think, you know, I also don't think empathy is a kind of, a lot of people speak of empathy and kindness in this very artsy hallmark kind of way, like a very gentle, kumbaya, we all come together. But no, I think a lot of empathy and kindness are also about rage and anger at inequality and injustice, historical and present. And I think we will see, I'm happy to see a lot more fights in our cities, a lot more contestations, because we need those. We need those frictions as well to be acknowledged before a kind of genuine solidarity and empathy can hold, right? You can't just go from structural historical inequality structured on caste, gender, religious lines, magically into a kind of polity where we see each other as a public. That's not going to happen like that. There's going to be tension. There should be tension. Those tensions to me would be more democratic. And I think the terms is how to think a little bit about those struggles and those questions, right? And I think that's the question worth asking is, there are ways to think about the infrastructures of the way things work, and there is empathy in a functioning water connection. There is empathy in a drain that flushes. There's empathy in the dignity of basic human development infrastructure and working public institutions. So that's a different kind of fight that one can take in terms of building empathy, right? There is also an empathy of a different kind in everyday social relations, in culture, in fabric, in everyday life, in landscapes of violence and coexistence and recognition and difference and all of those. And that's a different fight. So I think there are many ways to think about empathy. But I think the last year has really shown us in many ways how our urbanization has been built on very, very vulnerable foundations around questions of empathy. And I think some of that shaking is good. I think it's long overdue. And until some of our facades sort of slip away, we will not be able to really pick the next fights. So we're in very interesting times, but the routes to empathy are many. Okay. Will there be an exposure visit as well? It's on the cards, it's all planned, but so far, yes. But we will take that decision collectively together, because we thought we were done with the pandemic in so many ways, and now look where we are. So we will have to take a call collectively. So far we planned for it. We hope it works. We've done it every year other than this current year when we couldn't. So we hope it will be back. Okay, folks, so we're at 6:01. So shall we call it? I think it's been really nice chatting with all of you guys. It's good to see many of you of the current batch as well. And we'll catch up, and good luck with everything. And put in your applications. Don't wait till Sunday. Really try and put that in there. Check out some of those. Check out some of the earlier webinars. Really spend some time looking at a lot of your questions. I think a lot of the alumni testimonials will help you think through and hear from folks in their own words about what they went through. And I think that will help. So spend some time on the site over there. Drop in any questions or concern with us. Happy Ambedkar Jayanti to you all. And it is a good day in many ways to remember many teachers of different kinds, especially on Ambedkar Jayanti. So think about that, and take care, and stay very safe, please. These are difficult times, but they will pass, and hope to see many of you in the interviews. Okay. All right.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, Gautam.